We're not supporting entrepreneurs in the right ways to help them develop their businesses for growth or for scale. And it's a collective failing. And it represents a huge opportunity for us. If we can better navigate these existing challenges and help reduce the barriers that entrepreneurs face, I really think we can not only support the entrepreneurs themselves, but increase economic growth and economic mobility.
That was Philip Gaskin, Principal Advisor on Capital Innovation and the former chair of the U.S. Small Business Administration report that exposed just how deep this issue runs. He's helped hundreds of entrepreneurs across 90 countries navigate uncertainty, and he's bringing that wisdom straight to you. But first, imagine this. A woman from Memphis has been running her small business for 3 years. She bakes cakes, pastries, wedding treats, and her storefront is always filled with the smell of vanilla and ambition. She's got a steady stream of loyal customers and glowing online reviews. But behind the scenes, the books are tight. Supply costs keep rising. She's applied for loans. Denied. Applied for grants. Nothing. Tried to scale by partnering with local grocers. No bites. She hears about venture capital in Silicon Valley. Biomedical money flooding into Boston, but nothing for people like her. She's not in the right zip code, doesn't have the right connections, and at the end of another long day, she's wondering, is it me? Or is the game just rigged? Now that story might be fictional, but the pain point is all too real. And today, on Live in Living Cities, we're digging into exactly that. For the first time in decades, the United States has slipped out of the top 10 most competitive economies in the world. That decline is not just a data point. It's a warning bell. And the entrepreneurs, dreamers, and builders of this country are the ones hearing it the loudest. But here's the good news. We're not just talking about what's wrong. We're offering a way forward. So let's jump right into the conversation. Philip, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, firstly, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do?
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Philip Gaskin, and I run my own consulting and advisory firm that helps organizations, specifically governments, nonprofits, philanthropies, understand their markets better and how to meet their markets, especially when it comes to providing capital to entrepreneurs, to communities, to ecosystems. And I've been doing this work in a number of different ways over the years, both in the for-profit and the nonprofit space.
Okay. Now, Philip, you wrote a LinkedIn article back in June. The U.S. is no longer one of the most competitive economies. Here's what that means for business owners. You open up that piece with a really personal story about your father as a business owner. Why did you choose to begin there? And how does that connect to what entrepreneurs are facing today?
In doing that work with a really excellent team on that advisory committee, the word competitiveness just kept coming up. And it made me think of growing up and watching my dad having to compete for so many things he needed just to open a small business. He had to compete for respect. He had to compete for funding. He had to compete for support. He had to compete for mentorship. And in his case, it was because of where we lived, the zip code we lived in, the color of his skin, the credit score just being 3 points too low, all those different types of things. And it reminded me that entrepreneurs in general, regardless of geography, regardless of other demographics, go through a number of different barriers and are competing for what really should be easy. To be able to access funding, knowledge, support, as we used to say in the other work that I've done, and it's just too hard. And we saw that in the data, in the work that we were doing, looking at from a United States small business perspective. And so I started it that way as just a primer, that even though he was focused on a small business, not a larger innovation type of venture, that there are common themes across demographics that hurt many people.
Thanks for that. And it painted a very vivid picture. You painted a very vivid picture about the barriers that he did face. And so, moving on from that, you shared a recent Small Business Administration report that found that the US had dropped out of the top 10 in global competitiveness. That's a big headline. Can you break down what that actually means for the average business owner?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked the question in that way because it's about what is it? What does that mean? Because the whole thing is very heady. It basically means that there are gaps in what government and business can provide, support and resources it can provide to help business owners or to help people start businesses. Innovators innovate, inventors invent. And if you take that down to the average business owner, like in your question, it's one, can I be seen? Do people really know what I truly need as a business owner? Am I being listened to as a business owner? Can I get a response to the question I have of those who might be able to provide resources? How long will that take? Et cetera. And those are things that we just found that the response time and synergies between governmental or business departments or what have you, there was gaps that we suggested could be improved in order to increase speed of resource of information to the business owner or to those wanting to start businesses so that those businesses can be successful, so that they can employ more people, so that there is more tax revenue in the economy and on and on.
That's a wonderful point. I would like to drill down a little bit on what, like you mentioned a couple of things, but are there any more that you can think of that you can tell our audience what does that lack of support look like on the ground?
Well, it's the business opening or closing. You know, it is, I need that first or second loan just for the barber chair, the freezer in the ice cream shop, the truck for the construction company, the laboratory equipment. I need the best information competitively across the world to know where do I stack up in my innovation venture. All of those things that can be overwhelming for the business owner because they're trying to run the business, grow the business, market the business, do all of those different types of things and against a competitive landscape. They could be competing with people in their own on their own block, their own neighborhood, in their own country, across the world. And so there's a speed there that it becomes an issue. But it's business survival, it's business growth, business survival. It's can that dream actually happen? How quickly can it? Can it be successful? On and on.
Thank you for that. You mentioned also over 80% of new businesses aren't relying on traditional financial institutions. What's driving that shift and what's being lost in the process?
It is interesting. It's not really a shift. It's just the reality that's been sitting there because it goes back to some of the story about my dad and the credit score. So you've got some that may not have a history of credit, may not have the perfect credit score. So they're not going to get traditional loans because of that. Then you got venture capital on the other side where most of that is, but venture capital doesn't necessarily see them as well. So they're sort of caught in the middle. And so you've got that big number. They aren't relying on those traditional financial means in order to start a business or grow a business. What do they do instead? Well, they end up going to families for funding for those that do have families that have the resources. But if you don't, or it's running up credit card debt, or it's payday loans, or it's all these different types of things that just aren't sustainable and end up putting pressure on the entrepreneur, the business owner even more.
Yeah, and that's not conducive to an equitable economy, to say the least.
Yeah.
Just racking up debt and just going even more, going even further into debt just to have a shot at the American dream. Thank you for that. There's also a striking stat in your article about venture capital, as you mentioned in that previous answer. 60% of venture capital funding goes to California. how is this kind of geographic concentration impacting innovation and entrepreneurship, like overall across the country?
Well, it assumes when you have that many going to, so they're the Northeast and other parts of the U.S., maybe 4 or 5 metropolitan areas or geographies, it's assuming that people in the middle of states or the middle of the country can't innovate, don't innovate, and puts too much pressure on other entities to try to fill in that gap.
Yeah.
And so this impacts a number of people, especially women, Black, and other people of color, and the data just proves that out. Um, but it's not all. It's in rural America, where of course, there's all different demographics in rural America, but it hurts entrepreneurs. Like I said, entrepreneurship is for all and can be for all, for anyone who wants to do that. But it doesn't help when so many people can't be seen. I go back to that again, be seen as their idea is as good and if they were sitting in another part of the country.
Gotcha. You mentioned, you brought up people of color, other marginalized communities, rural entrepreneurs, and non-traditional founders. Other than what you've spoken to, other than the venture capital concentrating in a specific locale, can you speak more about what other barriers those communities may face in terms of entrepreneurship?
Well, yeah, and I'll start with rural. It's a big passion of mine. Broadband in some areas, access to a innovation hub or co-working space, which may be in a city you have to drive to, that may be too far away. So you end up not being able to be in person and everything. And while a lot is done, through technology now, it's sort of undemocratized from us, if I could use that term, as it relates to being able to have the opportunity to have what other people have. So it becomes something of how do we continue to revive rural America, because you have people that are leaving that and going to cities. And so, but not everyone can do that. So how do we not waste that talent there? And as it relates to people of color, they're just on the stats. It's the funding and other support. There's data to prove, as opposed to bank loans or other type of things, that there's a skew as it relates to funding, depending on the type of funding being asked for, at what level, and it becomes harder. And so what happens is people then they just drop out and say, this is just too hard. I'm going to go back and go to the other job or the day job. That's more challenging because technology even could be taking away that day job that you used to have or had. So then what?
Yeah.
So it's tough.
And you spoke about, the idea, the vision of what a good entrepreneur or a good founder looks like. In your opinion, how can policymakers or funders of all stripes begin to broaden their understanding of what a truly good founder looks like, and
Yeah.
build systems that are truly inclusive?
And the listening and learning, I've always urged policymakers, and some of our mayors across the country are doing a great job on this, of just going out and holding more town halls and said, how do I get all the entrepreneurs in my community in one room, and using their working with their staff to identify and bring them together, and also working with their chambers of commerce and other. But it's how do I learn and listen to how many do I have in my town, in my city? And that may be easier at a smaller location than a larger one, but not necessarily so. You could argue the larger one has more resources to find it and convene those. But that is certainly one. And funders as well, I think, as it relates to, becomes a risk thing, I believe. To what degree are you willing to risk? or widen your risk tolerance as it relates to fill in the blank. This becomes a purpose thing of what is your purpose as a funder? What is your purpose as someone with the means and the wealth and the ability to be in service to others? Do you want to re-examine that and perhaps widen that versus have it be more siloed? Yes, it's about, especially for a venture capital firm, it is about turning profit into that. Got that. But the assumption that a certain venture cannot be profitable and or perhaps at less than what you would prefer is, again, it comes back to an internal purpose thing, I believe. Which other factors, but this, I'm introducing this one because it's just not talked about enough.
So, Philip, you outlined 3 key steps entrepreneurs can take to stay competitive: finding your special sauce, focusing on customer experience, and building partnerships. Can you walk us through why each of these is so critical in today's economic climate?
As a marketing major and passionate about marketing and branding and perception, I shudder when I see entrepreneurs have a product and they haven't thought that through. And they end up struggling for the product and the business to survive. So understanding what your special sauce is, and this is a really good exercise because you have to become dispassionate here. You're passionate about your service, you're passionate about your idea and all that, got it. But you have to be really, really clear. Is there a market for what I'm doing? And so, what is it? Will they buy it? Is it distinct enough from competition? And if it isn't, you may need to rethink what you're putting out in order to be successful. That leads into customer experience. I write on this as well, in that so much success, and in order to withstand economic downturns, is to make sure you're emotionally connecting with your buyer. So the customer experience, and you're seeing this a lot now with brands, is they are looking at new experiences to retain customers and grow them. Inviting them into their store and doing different things, or different types of events, or different types of visual things, whatever it may be, is really important. So that's also on differentiation, but that's on customer retention. And then the building of partnerships, things are complex. That's why design thinking and other things have been so popular and or successful in the past decade, is that how to think through difficult problems in the shortest amount of time with the least amount of friction and the most amount of success. You can't necessarily do it on your own. You're going to need a partner at times, or partners are building partnerships and strong alliances in order to expand your market, expand your footprint, do things maybe the partners can complement what you don't have the resources to do. But in the end, your product and your business is successful. So those are why those things are so important in today's economic climate. But it could in any economic climate, but certainly help in economic downturn times, or times of upheaval.
Thank you. I want to go back a little bit to the partnerships aspect of it. Do you have any examples, per se, of any organizations or companies or businesses, entrepreneurs creating an effective partnership that, that can serve as like a model to what that would look like, or anything recent that we can our audience can grasp to?
Well, one of the things I did when I was in philanthropy was realize that we had a set amount of monetary resources, and we have very big goals in entrepreneurship to support entrepreneurs and reduce barriers. The strategic barriers are other barriers that get in the way of people growing and starting businesses on a daily basis. We had limited resources, a limited team, could not do and meet all of our big goals by ourselves. We had to create partnerships with organizations who had platforms, distribution platforms, other type of platforms, in order to help us achieve our goals of how many entrepreneurs we could support or how many communities we could help improve economically. And that model can be used across industries. In business, who are my other partners? Who can I potentially find or work with in order to do that? And it could be cross-sector. Do I work with my chamber of commerce? Do I work with my civic organizations? Do I work with the university? Do I work with someone? And that's why the effective ecosystems are so important, so people can find each other in order to do these things. There's a lot of, I'm going to create a word here, probably siloism happening, where people with passion creating their own ventures, but there may be 5 others in your same city doing the exact same thing, and you're all competing. And maybe there could be a strategic partnership, and you all amplify. Those are just the type of, or amplify and or grow. Those are just the type of things to think through, and to look at partnerships in a new way is not necessarily as a competitive disadvantage or threat, but as a competitive opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we see in places where business owners are coming together to buy their own retail space so they don't have to pay rent, and they won't have to be beholden to rising rent costs and stuff like that. And so that's another way businesses can partner together to ensure the mutual survival of, and themselves. So yeah, thank you for that. So even with all this uncertainty, your message to entrepreneurs is one of hope, that growth is still possible. What advice would you give to someone who's feeling overwhelmed right now and unsure where to start?
There's a whole bunch of other people in your same boat. And that's a positive, because you're not alone. Understand you're not alone. Understand there's a lot of people pulling for you to be successful. I urge connection. I urge finding spaces where other entrepreneurs are. Seek those out. Ask your community college, your high school, your university in town, your mayor's office. Where can I go to meet other folks? Co-working spaces are fantastic for this. It can feel, entrepreneurship is lonely. It can be lonely, right? And at different times and different stages, sometimes it's absolutely fantastic. And other times it's like you've got the weight of the world, because the decision is for you to make and no one else. That's a freedom to have, actually, and look at it from that way. I am free to make this decision. I don't have to go to anyone else. That's powerful. And so you sort of like turn things upside down and realize that autonomy and other things is actually something that could spur you. That's something to think about.
Thank you. And if there's one action you'd like to see funders, governments, or ecosystem builders take immediately to better support small businesses, what would it be?
I would like to see funders, governments, ecosystem builders do a number of things. But first, let me clarify that everyone that we mentioned has a role in ecosystem building. There are a number of different personas of an ecosystem builder. It can be the academic, the university, the corporation, government, on and on and on. Entrepreneur, the entrepreneur support organization, blah, blah, blah. What I haven't really seen yet, and I'm going to talk to not the entrepreneur or the entrepreneur nonprofit support organization, but I'm talking about the governments, the corporates, the larger ones, to sort of come together and talk about and have a really candid conversation on where they don't necessarily like each other, or where they wish the other would do something better in order to serve small businesses. For instance, with a bank, they could say, hey, I'm honest. These are the way my procedures go. It takes me this time to do that. This is the way I analyze risk, and da-da-da. And a non-bank could say, but you know what? That's one of the actual problems. How can you, in this day and age, change that? Someone then talks to someone else like the corporation. Well, we don't really do it that way. Why not? Go to your shareholders. Say, it's about coming up with having those conversations of what can really challenge each other in a very benign, productive way, but have really good cross-sector conversations to create change models or create a new one. That's what I'd love to see happen. Start immediately, because that's going to take time. But I believe it's a very important thing. When you're tackling that big thing, speeding up your delivery on funding, right? And removing bottlenecks on funding and bottlenecks on information and all that. We started with that today, talking about competitiveness and what's challenging competitiveness. And so speed to market, information, other resources.
Exactly. That bottleneck can be a real hassle, because I remember reading a story about an entrepreneur who was on the hook, who needed to pay rent, and, I think it was purchasing. And so they were told that they needed to make a certain amount of money in a certain number of time. And by the time that any loan process or anything would get to him, was too late. And so,
yeah,
it's one of those things where it's like speeding up the delivery, I think is a definite short-term goal there.
And how you assess your programs, how you assess how you deliver, and your speed delivery. Again, as I said, it took my dad 4 years to get that first loan. 4 years of going to banks, 4 years of hearing this. How many other people are going through that still today, and regardless of demographic, more than we would like?
Way to put a pin on that point. Philip, thank you so much for being with us. Thanks to Philip for joining us, and thank you for joining us on Live with Living Cities. We're grateful to have you with us as we explore what it takes to build a more inclusive and equitable future. If you'd like to learn more or get involved, visit livingcities.org. And if you found this episode meaningful, be sure to subscribe and share it with others who care about closing the wealth gap and driving change. Before we wrap up, we want to extend a huge thank you to the incredible organizations that make this work possible. Living Cities is powered by a coalition of leaders and changemakers whose dedication and support drive our mission forward. We're honored to work alongside you in the movement to close income and wealth gaps and create a lasting impact in communities across the country. Stay engaged, stay inspired, and let's keep working together toward a future where equity is a reality for all. Until next time, I'm Justin Charles, and this has been Live with Living Cities.